I think the president should embrace his age, his experience, the knowledge that he brings to the job. Actually, the leader on the other side is not much younger. Well, you know, I don't like to use his name, but you know who I mean. He's not that much younger.
Yeah.
So I don't think age is a relative thing. It is, and I think this president, our country is very well served by his leadership. Again, his experience, his knowledge, and it counts for a lot.
That, of course, is Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi on Morning Joe back in July, encouraging President Biden to embrace his age. New reporting in Politico magazine details how the former House Speaker may be prepared to take her own advice. Jonathan Martin has a deep dive out this morning looking into why Nancy Pelosi might run again. And senior political columnist for Politico, Jonathan Martin, joins us now. J. Mark, good morning. So let's read a little from your piece out this morning in Politico magazine. You write this, quote, Nancy Pelosi is a towering figure, perhaps the most consequential speaker to ever wield the gavel of the House, and certainly the most powerful elected woman in American history. At a time when her octogenarian counterparts in the Oval Office and Senate leadership suite are visibly hobbled by age, the 83-year-old San Franciscan, older than both Joe Biden and Senator Mitch McConnell, seemingly defies the march of time. Now, having relinquished her leadership role in Washington, the question is if she will do the same with her House seat at a time when California's clout in the Capitol is diminished. Her party is led by Northeasterners in the White House and both chambers of Congress, and San Francisco is facing acute, if not as dire as portrayed, challenges in the aftermath of the pandemic. So, Jonathan, you spent a bunch of time with the former Speaker of the House. Did you come away thinking she's going to hang in for a couple more terms?
I don't know about a couple more terms, Billy, but I think she's really struggling with whether or not to hang it up, in part because of the challenges that San Francisco is facing right now. And there's few people, frankly, in the history of the U.S. Congress who are better positioned to work the levers of federal, state, and local government to help a district than she is. Willie, there's also the issue of Senator Feinstein, and this was probably the tensest part of our conversation. I spent most of a 12-hour day riding around with the former speaker throughout San Francisco, and it got pretty tense talking about Senator Feinstein and obviously her condition, which is pretty serious. And Pelosi, Willie, has been much more personally involved than is publicly known in making the case that Feinstein should be able to decide on her own what to do. And obviously Feinstein wants to stay in office. But this is a factor because San Francisco will be looking at the prospect of really in about 5-6 years' time losing barber boxer Dianne Feinstein and Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That's a lot of clout for one city in a real time of need to lose in its federal delegation. And then lastly, this is personal for her, Willie, because obviously her husband did suffer an attack. I saw him out there. He looks a lot better now, but she has lived her city's disorder in a very personal way. It showed up on her doorstep, quite literally. So there's that factor too. And then the last thing I'll mention, her daughter Christine, who is widely seen as a potential heir to that seat. That's also a factor as well. So there's a lot going on for her personally and professionally with this choice.
Jonathan, I understand the political reality that you've just described, the practical implications of what's happening with San Francisco. But what about the generational tension that we're seeing in the Democratic Party right now? What does it mean for the former speaker to be thinking about this in this moment where we see and hear young people clamoring for a younger generation of leaders in the Democratic Party and for the nation broadly?
Well, look, there's no question about it that there is a long line of people in that city who are eager to stake their claim to her seat. She's had the seat since 1987, and there's sort of people who are eager to make a move. And the broader challenge for people like Pelosi and Biden is that for all of their service, a lot of Americans, especially those under 30, they just want to see somebody who is closer to their own age, who understands their perspective more on the country, on the world. And that obviously is something that Pelosi has to deal with. I mean, she recognizes this. She comes from a city that is known for its cultural churn, for its sort of challenging of the status quo. And so I think she recognizes that. But look, for a lot of these members, as Joe knows, it's darn hard to walk away.
You know, Jonathan, Susan Page here, congratulations on getting an actual answer to the question about whether she wants to be ambassador to Italy. I've been speculating about that for years. Maybe I'll stop because you got a flat denial from Paul Pelosi, and I assume that is the last word on that. I'm wondering, though, her sensitivity about Dianne Feinstein's future when Dianne Feinstein, the senator, is clearly in such serious health decline. Is there some other reason that she wants to make sure that Feinstein stays in office till the end of her term? Is she trying to engineer, for instance, who might be in a position to replace her?
Susan, that's a very good question, and wrote, I should say, plug here, a very nice book about Speaker Pelosi as well that really chronicles her rise. Yes, look, part of Pelosi's motivation here when it comes to Feinstein is, yes, the appearance of pushing a prominent woman out of the Senate, but it also owes to the succession issues in the Senate, namely the fact that Pelosi wants Adam Schiff to succeed Dianne Feinstein. Schiff, of course, one of her closest allies and lieutenants in the House. And Pelosi knows that if Feinstein has to resign, that Gavin Newsom has pledged publicly to appoint a black woman. And that, of course, would complicate Adam Schiff's ascent to the U.S. Senate. So there is some more California sort of dominoes falling there as well, yeah.